everybody. Welcome to the Mud and Rib Podcast. We are about love, life, and leadership, and we are starting a 4-week mini-series on marriage, and we are really excited to talk about this. We did a poll and asked some of you what topics you wanted us to talk about, and so this week we're going to start out with communication and conflict resolution. Then we're going to move into emotional connection and intimacy. So that'll be a conversation about a lot of things, but we'll talk about sex as well. But for today, I'm going to have Guy kick this off with just a recap, kickoff of this marriage series.
Yeah, for sure. So we just finished a series that we actually use in coaching for engaged or married couples about urges that rob us of connection. You know, there's urges that rob us of connection in our relationship with our husband or wife, but also in our community. So those things that we talked about in this last 4-part series, what was it? City building,
fire lighting, well digging, and white wall washing or wall whitewashing, that each of those rob us of connecting. And so it would be really good to go back and look at that and think, okay, what are some of the things that I do, the urges within me? Because all of us have this pool of brokenness in our lives. And when we're aware of it, and sometimes it's attached to I think, our temperament or behavior patterns. And so if we're aware of that, it can help us in our connecting with husband and wife, in our communication, and really with everything. And so in the side-by-side that we did, what episode was that? That was episodes
3 and 4, I think.
3 and 4, yes.
Back then, we talked a lot about the things that impact our working together and the oneness we already have, but also that you have oneness in Christ. If you and your spouse are committed in a covenant relationship with God through a relationship with Jesus Christ, then you have oneness. But what you have to do is start acting like it. And there's a lot of things we have to learn and fail forward with and extend grace to one another and be aware of our differences. And we talked about, like, we use the DISC test, and we always give a shout out to Phil Reynolds, who taught us that. Some know the Enneagram or Myers-Briggs, but all of those things just in our differences help us, because some of us are question askers. Some of us are more tellers.
Yes.
Some of us are risk assessors, and some of us are risk takers. And so if you get a risk taker and a risk assessor together, that could be a lot of conflict that you have to communicate, work through to get to really working together.
Yes.
So that's important as well. Then I think we even talked about love languages back then,
a little
didn't
bit,
we?
yes.
Yeah. So there is a lot that we can learn together to communicate effectively in our marriage, and so that we can move to a place of collaborating. So the connecting is, okay, we are one in Christ in covenant, and we're going to begin to act that out, and communication is a key piece of it. And then how do we live marriage on mission? So those are kind of the important principles that we're going to be talking about in this series. And of course, it's holistic, body, soul, and spirit. So we'll be diving into some of those things.
Yeah, and so we want to just say up front, there's no way we could cover every possible scenario that could happen in someone's life. And we do offer coaching outside of our podcast if you feel like that you need something more than what you're getting just from the podcast, where your specific needs could be addressed and worked with you and coaching you on that with you and your spouse. So know that that is an available option for you. But we'll cover as much as we can in this time over these 4 subjects. That's why it's called a mini marriage series. One thing I want to say as we kind of launch into this is, we always say that we want to change the narrative that marriage doesn't have to be hard. And one of someone that I know said, I don't think that's a fair statement, because marriage is hard. And yes, marriage is or can be hard.
Yes.
But one of the things that I believe wholeheartedly as to why marriage is hard for so many people is being married will refine you. It makes you be faced with yourself and your own selfish ways.
Right.
And so what's really hard is not necessarily marriage. I think it's dying to our own selfish ways and really being willing to die to certain things in order to have a good marriage. And so the longer we've been married and the more we've died to our own selfish ways, and I don't feel like dying to certain things has caused me to not be myself or miss out on who I actually am and God created me to be, it's actually made our marriage better, and I'm not missing out on anything. So I think sometimes people think dying to self might mean I can't be who I am.
Yeah, not experiencing God's pleasure in the midst of it because somehow, you're robbing yourself. And I when I think about, people saying, well, this is hard, and us, saying, well, it's not hard. Well, the hard part is really, like you're saying, is learning to walk in maturity and not be selfish.
Right.
And I think that when we choose, like Psalms, I think it's Psalms 37:4, I believe, says, delight yourself in the Lord and he'll give you desires of your heart. And so if we will learn to walk with God and experience his pleasure in our obedience and our trusting him and our dying to self, as you're talking about, I think our desires become his desire, and it just brings joy.
Yes.
And so there's joy that comes with it, and then part of the reason why it's hard is because we're hard-headed. I could say that.
I'm hard-headed for sure.
Yes. And I mean, that's how we started out in our marriage. And one of the things we're going to talk about today is what were some of the fights that we started out with that are really not such an issue today, because a lot of them were childish and built upon hard-headedness.
Yeah, so we're not perfect, and it's not that we don't fight. We had a stupid...
Oh, no, I'm perfect. You broken and scarred.
Oh yeah, I am scarred, but I'm redeemed. We're gonna talk. But the point of it, of showing that 35 years of marriage, things are much better and enjoyable, is to show that this is where you can also be if you're willing to do these things. So yeah, one of the questions someone asked in our poll is, what are some of the things that you fight about? So we're going to talk about the hardest part for us was our first year or two of marriage and some of the things that we fought about during that time. And so let's start with one of the things that we fought about related to me is I thought guys should read my mind. So I'll give you a few examples. I liked things quite a bit more tidy in our house than Guy did. I'm trying to be really nice.
Quite a bit more tidy.
Guy didn't.
Basically, she's saying Guy was a slob in some ways when we started out, and I had it all together.
He wasn't unclean.
No.
He was just messy. Very messy. Did not mind things laying around. And so I would look around the house and say, God, why does he not see that this place is a flipping disaster and not do anything? And he would say, well, what do you want me to do? I want you to read my mind. Basically, I mean, I wasn't saying outright, I want you to read my mind, but I was basically saying, I want you to read my mind. If you don't know, that's what I would say. If you don't know, I'm not telling you.
Yeah. And with that, I think not all women, ladies, don't come sending me hate mail or coming after me. But I think that women say, if he loved me, he would know. And I'm like, bro, I don't know, because love looks different to different people. And to think that everybody knows love the way you see love is really foolish.
Well, I don't even think that goes to the question of, did you love me or not? You loved me. It was just, we were different.
But it's still around the reading of the minds and
Yes.
thinking that you know, and that gets you in trouble. Building those kind of expectations will create god-awful conflict.
Oh, and it was awful. It was back then, before there was the internet.
Before there was internet. Man,
I read a book called Men Don't Read Minds, They Read Newspapers. Now it'd be Men Don't Read Minds, They Read the Internet. But it really helped me. And we're going to talk more about assertive communication and what we had to do differently. But that was one of the things that we fought about. One of the other things is Guy trying to force change or control change in me.
Yeah. Really kind of picking at her in areas that I saw as immaturity and picking, agitating, just unhealthy the way I dealt with it, and it really made Kelli mad, and it caused me to realize this is creating unnecessary conflict and not working. So I came to a place, a lot of this is coming to a place where you can only control you and put you under the control of Christ and the Holy Spirit. So I came to a place where I was like, okay, God, change me. I need to quit focusing on her and say, make me the man, the husband, the man you want me to be, and change me. And it was amazing the difference that made in our marriage.
Yeah, because no longer did I feel like you were just picking at me.
Yeah.
I felt like you actually, that's when I actually felt like you loved me.
Right.
Because you just were accepting me for who I was. Not that you didn't say anything, but it was just not in an agitating, picking.
Right.
I mean, Guy would actually say, oh, that's spiritual. And I would go totally postal.
Go ape, you know what?
I mean, for sure. So one of the
Wait a
other...
second. So my wonderful boyish charm and good looks just didn't get it done?
It wasn't enough. Sorry, it wasn't enough.
Wow. All right.
One of the other things for me was I lived in fear related to my past. And what I mean by that is anything Guy did that slightly resembled a past relationship that I had that was not healthy and not good, I would immediately go to the, oh, he's just like him card. And that would cause terrible conflict between us because one, that's not fair. And I needed to deal with, again, this was about me dealing with my own stuff. I had to deal with my own stuff about past hurts and realize and remind myself that he is not and was not those people that hurt me. And so that was a really big one that we fought about as well.
So dealing with like filters, we're filtering people through past
hurts,
sometimes trauma, but difficulty, let's say in relationships. Maybe some would refer to certain triggers that you had, particularly because, you had some rough relationships with some abusive control and manipulation, etc. And so if I did anything that you thought resembled that, you would say, oh, he's just like those other guys.
One, you add the fact that you were trying to control my change.
Yeah.
And I saw that as trying to control me, which is what had been in my past. That just created this vicious cycle for us. And praise God, we've been able to get out of that cycle. And I don't even think like that anymore. And there's so much history of just good, being a good husband that I don't feel that way, but that took work.
Yeah, I remember one, I think it's important for us to communicate where we were as two young mid-20s, 24 and 25. But our heart's desire was to grow, to be changed, to be transformed by the power of the gospel, by the power of the Spirit, and really walk in godliness together.
Yes.
That was our desire. So we need to frame this in the prerequisite. We're talking two people that really wanted to walk with God.
Because if you don't, this changes the whole conversation.
Yes, it can be, if you've got someone that wants to change and transform and move forward and grow together and someone who doesn't, that's a whole nother issue. But again, the reality is all you can control is yourself.
That's right.
And also when we're talking about this kind of stuff and you have these kind of cycles, someone needs to be a cycle breaker in those things and choose to do the right things for the right reasons, no matter the results. And I remember there was times where it felt like you were trying to push me away. And I would say, I'm not going anywhere. I'm never going anywhere. I love you. I choose us.
Yes.
And I am here and I'm not going anywhere.
And that made all the difference in the world for me because what I would do is the relationships, I've already said it, I was divorced twice before I was 21 years old, and they were very abusive. And so in my mind, I didn't know this, but I was actually saying, you know what, he's probably going to leave you. And so he might as well leave now. And so in a lot of ways, I subconsciously was pushing you away, self-protection, trying to keep myself from being hurt when you left. And so when you would say things like that, I just felt like you were really committed. And over time, I began to believe that. So that goes back to those truth statements that really help to reframe and retrain the way we think about things.
Yeah, and trust does have to be built over time.
Yes.
And we can talk about some principles of building trust in relationships and marriage and various things with coworkers, people that we're co-laboring with, etc.
And I want to move to the next question, but one more thing. I just want to say isn't always just a dating or marriage relationship that you can have triggers from. It can be from parents, a way a father raised you or a mother raised you.
Right.
Other people that you were in relationships. That's where we do bring everything from our life into our marriage.
That's true.
There were two more. We worked with students when we first got married, and adjusting to the time commitment Guy had to the students and me feeling like maybe I was second best to the students.
So let me ask you something. In relationship to that, what were some things that I did that helped you not feel second? Because I think that's a problem. There's a lot of people who almost demonstrate more passion and commitment to work to others than they do to the one that's supposed to be the significant covenant relationship in their life.
Yeah. I think some of them, we always had a date night.
Still do?
We still do. And there were times that you chose to do things with me, not begrudgingly, and you didn't have an attitude about it. It wasn't like you did it and then it was just a miserable time because I chose to do this just to prove something to you. So there were times you chose to spend time with me, but also just the reaffirmation of our relationship and bringing me along and valuing me in front of other people. I think that was a huge one, is you always have valued me in front of other people. So if someone says, oh, Guy said something bad about you, I know you didn't say that because you have never been like that. Right. You've always valued me in front of other people. And so, and behind the scenes, you've always valued me. It's not just in front of people, it's also at home you value me.
That's good, because I think that one of the things that I've learned to do is to create a culture of honor with me and you. And then that culture of honor flows out to others.
Yes.
And there's something about honoring one another, honoring different gifts, honoring your spouse, even honoring your children. Just a culture of honor is something that brings about a health in the ecosystem of relationships. Well,
and I think also when you're talking about ministry, it is challenging because sometimes I think people think ministry isn't a job. And you don't want it. It's not. This is so complicated because it isn't a job. Ministry is relationships. But in reality, if that's your primary source of your income, and or it's just the focus of what God has asked us to do is to be about people, then how do I not be selfish myself as a spouse and think that everything is about taking something from me? So I had some choices myself. I could either get involved with you so we could be together more and do this together, or I could choose to sit home.
Yeah. And that's there. I mean, we could go off on
that's a whole nother thing,
a whole nother issue about when you bring corporation or corporate into what should be spiritual family, it does bring in some complications, because if you're going to get paid and people are paying you, it does have a corporate nature to it that I think in some ways can undermine biblical values and make it challenging. But if you've agreed to enter into that corporate system, then you have a job to do and a job description, and you need to honor it. And that's also a part of it. Yeah. And that can be challenging on a lot. That's not what this is about, but it can be super challenging.
Exactly. So let's move on. What we're going to talk about now is just some of the questions that some of you in our audience have asked. And so one of them is, how can one or both couples not shut down on each other when in conflict or when they're overwhelmed, and how to have a healthy discussion? How can a couple not go to bed angry? That's more than one question, but that's a great question.
I remember, and I think it was because, and you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong, but I think when in the early days, it's weird because we're not like this anymore in our dynamic together, but I would have to learn to give you space because I was always pressing for an answer or to work through conflict when you were angry or frustrated. And you were like, I just need time. And so part of it is learning how to give each other space in understanding where you are. And if you try to handle stuff in anger, whatever it is, discipline your kids, conflict, communication, anger leads to sin. And there's just no doubt about it. You know, in your anger, do not sin. So if you can't let go of your anger immediately, just in that time, it is probably good that you give someone a little space for them to deal with their anger.
So I think there's multiple reasons why people shut down. I think one of them could be anger. For me, it was anger. Yep. I wanted to respond in a way that would honor God, and I knew I couldn't do it because I was so angry. And so I needed space to do that. And now I don't feel that way because God has done a work in me. But the other thing I've seen in people is they shut down because they don't know what to do with their emotions. And it may not be an emotion of anger, and they may not know what to say. They just don't have the words to communicate their feelings or their emotions. And I think that in itself is a whole nother struggle when you're talking about shutting down. And so you have to find, as a couple, how to ask the right questions in order to diffuse and come to an agreement. I think there needs to be an agreement beforehand. So let's say a pattern is that one of you shuts down. And sometimes it could be both of you, which would be really challenging, but one of you shuts down. In our case, it was me. There needs to be an agreement ahead of time before you're not in the middle of a fight. How are we going to handle these times when we get in a conflict and you need time to get away?
Yeah, so it's like indicator phrases. This is important practices. Like when you don't want me to fix you, you will say, look, I just need you to listen. And so I don't try to give you my fix it. Because there's always like, well, you just do this, and this, and that'll solve your problem.
Yes.
And you're like, bro, I just need you to listen to me. And it's very similar to that.
It's very similar.
Okay, I need some time out.
But we agreed on that ahead of time. Like when I started noticing that you would do that, and I knew your intention was good, I started saying before I would share something, this is not something I need you to fix. I just need someone to talk to, just vent, and you don't have to fix it. I got it.
What about the situation whenever it was like you needed space? How did we communicate that?
Yeah, after we would be past a fight or we realized this was a pattern, we just agreed ahead of time that whenever we're in this situation, and I need you to not press me, but I have to be able to say, Guy, I need some space to think about this before I respond. Would you give me 30 minutes?
Yep.
And I do want to say, this is not an endless amount of time. Like, you have to be committed to come back and not leave your spouse hanging in a fight. And ideally before you go to bed, because that answers the question of how can couples not go to bed angry? That's a commitment to not go to bed angry. You have to commit to not go to bed angry.
Yeah, and just like we said, we're hard-headed in these other areas. There's a vindictive spirit or attitude, whatever you want to say, that some of us are trying to inflict harm. In that's a spirit of violence, vindictive, unforgiveness.
Silence.
Yes, it's damaging. So you are choosing, honestly, to side with the enemy and to undermine your marriage just in those little bitty things.
So when you shut someone down, when you are silent to them because and I'm gonna be honest, I remember feeling this battle within me of, I don't want to talk to him. I don't care if we go to bed mad. Just wanting to go to bed angry, but knowing the truth is we shouldn't go to bed angry, and choosing to talk through things, even if it meant staying up late to do it.
That's so crazy because you're so not like that now.
Well, no, that's just how much I've changed. But there are still times that I can get really angry and still really want to do that. But it's an internal battle. So I think we just have to call it what it is. I think that sometimes we are too kind about a lot of marriage problems, and the truth is we need to just do what is right.
Yep.
And I know that sounds overly simplified, but it is a matter of dying to self, what is right. And I would be so frustrated that I just almost couldn't, but I knew I had to say, I want us to talk about this.
Well, this is a lot about emotional maturity. Mm-hmm. So emotional health is very important in this relationship, and not going to bed angry and not shutting down. Because what happens is it's basically an indicator of emotional maturity that you cannot stay engaged and communicate your way through that. Just admit it.
Yes.
That is something that a teenager or even possibly as low as a toddler does. Mm-hmm. And so we actually utilize an emotional health survey, an indicator for you to evaluate yourself and your relationship on where you are in emotional maturity and where you are in the growth. Are you a child or an infant in this? Are you a maturing adult? And there's layers to this. And it takes time and working on this kind of stuff to move to a place of emotional maturity. And some of us, our emotional capacity is the size of a thimble. And you've got to get to where it's a swimming pool.
Yeah. And this is not for people to feel shame about that. It's just the longer that we don't evaluate these things and determine where we are, the longer we stay in the immaturity and we can't move to maturity. So we have to, like we always say, becoming aware is the first step. And I think a lot of it comes back to asking good questions, and we'll talk about that more, but to find out what is really going on. And y'all, we have to laugh more. I mean, we just have to laugh more. There's sometimes we've had fights and we look at each other and say, that is so stupid. Why are we, I don't even want to rehash what was said or not said, because everything we just said was so dumb and so childish and just irrelevant to our relationship. We're just moving on, and we will just laugh and move on. But a lot of times I think we just hold on to stuff. And it's like I said, when we were first married, I kept records wrong. I mean, I'd bring up all kinds of stuff that Guy did to prove a point of a history of what he would do. And even if it was true, it didn't help. Yeah. And so not keeping record of wrong, letting more things go, and just laugh. I mean, we have some friends we know that would fight about the color of the sky. And sometimes we'll start arguing about something that's just so ridiculous. And we'll look at each other and say, oh, so are we going to go, you know what, fight like so-and-so? It's not very nice, but we do. And that's just our indicator of like, we got to move on. Yep. This is just not good. So the next question is navigating when you see another side of your spouse, when they seem like two people or have a very ugly side.
Yeah, that's challenging. And you can't force someone to be self-aware, but you can sometimes hold up a mirror and just say, do you help me understand why you do that? Learning good questions in all of this is super helpful, even in that kind of challenging situation. Have you ever observed that whenever this happened, this is your behavior? Mm-hmm. Have you ever asked yourself why you do that? So asking good questions. Now, if this is a volatile situation, then there could be, and there should be, in cases sometimes where you're going to have to distance yourself from that kind of behavior. Mm-hmm. And then there becomes a question of, am I codependent in this relationship that I can't distance myself and say, you can't treat me that way in this instance, and I'm going to distance myself in this relationship till you make a commitment to treat me the way I need to be treated. Now, you can use that to manipulate people, but the reality is that you teach people how you want to be treated.
Yeah, that makes me think of two things. One is one of my favorite questions. If someone were treating me that way, sometimes they're one way and sometimes they're another. My question would be, if I treated you that way, how would that make you feel? Because sometimes I think people, it's no different. I know this sounds ridiculous, but it's no different than when one of our kids was a biter. And don't judge me for this, but one of our kids was a biter and would not stop. And I bit her back one day. And honestly, she didn't know what it felt like to be bit.
She stopped biting.
And she stopped biting. And I don't recommend that for everybody, but it worked. But it makes me, this is terrible. People are going to think we're crazy. But this just makes me think about how sometimes I don't think we think about how our behavior affects people. And I remember I did something to you one time and it really upset you. It was the first time you ever said that when I did that, it made you feel like I didn't love you. And that really hurt me because I would never want to do that. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes I think we have to help people understand how it makes someone feel when they do that. And so by asking them, how would you feel if I treated you that way? Not with an ugly tone. It has to be a genuine,
yes.
Like, how would, you're doing this, how would you make it feel? The other thing I was thinking about is, again, just goes back to asking questions. But sometimes these things do require more professional help than what, just what we're talking about. But for the average person, these are the types of things that I think would be a start in that type of a relationship.
Yeah, and I would try to avoid, it's not, I wish that I could say I was just perfect at this, but I'm not. Try to avoid communicating in anger. Like when you get, particularly men, when they get disrespected, they just get pissed and say, you will don't treat me this way. And that's really not the best way to go about it, even though that sometimes it may get some results, but does it get healthy relationships? Probably not. So I would try to be a non-anxious presence and boldly communicate, but in a posture of peace and a non-anxious presence. What I mean that you're not all amped up. So maybe it does take a minute to wait to have the conversation, but I think you need to have it, and you need to have it with a heart and a posture.
It could be as simple as saying, when you do this, I feel this way.
Yep.
And moving forward, when if this happens again, I'm going to take a drive around the block. I'm going to go in the other room. And then when you feel like you can talk about it, we will. So that's just a way of communicating some type of boundaries, but it's just not healthy for me to allow that type of, communication in our relationship.
One last thing, of course, in this, and we don't want to overlook praying your guts out.
Absolutely.
Just praying if your spouse is like double-minded or has like almost like duplicity or almost just two personalities at sometimes, I would just really bathe them in a ton of prayer before you have even these conversations.
I think that's really good. One of the other ones is, how do you have hard conversations and still love like Jesus does?
Well, we're speaking from a posture and a humility that comes from Christ. In Philippians chapter 2, in the same way, have the mind of Christ, who in humility, engaged and treated and considered others before he considered himself, and desired to be a peacemaker instead of a peacekeeper. We talked a little bit about that last time. I think that if all you want to do is keep the peace, then you're really not going to address these issues. But if you're a peacemaker, then you're going to make peace where you can. You can't always do that, but you're trying to address things, to challenge stuff with the truth, ask good questions, and all this stuff flows from our life in Christ, and Christ is our model for this.
So maybe this would be a good time to talk about active listening and assertive communication.
Yeah.
Because the next question someone had is how to communicate and listen in marriage. And so I want to just talk a little bit about this. So assertive communication is where it kind of goes back to what I said earlier. I wanted God to read my mind. And so I was saying things that were vague and not assertive, and saying really what it was that I meant and what I needed. And so an example of assertive communication would be, one, you need to make sure you're asking at a time that's appropriate. You don't want to ask these things in the middle of a heated conversation. This is when someone has time, they're not focused on work or doing something else. But an example would be saying to Guy, it would help me feel respected and appreciated if we could spend some time talking over financial decisions before we commit to any expenses that are not currently in our budget. Now, that's probably more something he'd say to me, not me say to him. But that's just an example. Knowing when I want to walk in the flesh, or I am walking in the flesh and not walking in the spirit, my first response, instead of saying it to you like that, would be, what's wrong with you? Why are you spending outside the budget? These are the types of things we say because they're easier and quicker. And we don't have to think about what we're saying.
Yeah.
But when we don't think about what we're saying, the results are not very good.
Yeah, and the way that you phrase that, you're putting the responsibility back on the person to communicate what the heck is going on. And that, I think that's important to get people to reflect upon, well, why am I doing this? And did we agree to do this? And help me understand what is going on with that. And so it's a good way to challenge people to think about, particularly if they've agreed upon these boundaries. Well, why are we not doing the very things we said we would agree upon? We said we'd do a budget and we would operate within that budget. Then why are we not doing that?
And what I like about it is by saying it would help me feel.
Right.
It's saying that, and it's clear. I would like it if we could talk about these things before there's large expenses, things purchased. So it's addressing clearly what the issue is. It's not some passive aggressive communication saying, oh, it must be nice to buy stuff like that. Those are the kind of things we do instead of assertively communicating what it is we need and why we need it.
Yeah, that would be another good way of putting that is, instead of respected, you could put in, it would help me if it's something around helping you feel loved, that it would help me feel loved if we talked about this and why we're doing this.
Yeah.
Something along those lines.
It would build trust in our relationship.
Yeah, those are
it would, those
Yep,
types of
that's
things.
really
So
good.
I think that's so the point of this is when you're talking about communicating and still maintaining a posture of loving that person, being like Jesus, it's communicating with clarity. It's communicating assertively, but I think we think of assertive communication as being direct and domineering, and its assertiveness is just clarity.
Yeah, taking initiation, has communicating with clarity. All of those are part of what we mean by assertive. We're not saying aggressive. I think we attach assertive to aggressive.
That's right.
Maybe another way would be initiative, that you're taking initiative to communicate.
And I like clarity because there needs to be clarity in the communication.
Yeah.
What is it that I'm saying? What is it that I need from you? And why do I need that? And how it makes me feel, not makes me feel, how I feel.
Yep.
Because you don't want to say it makes me feel. Nobody can make me feel anything.
Right.
But how do I feel when this happens?
So what you just said, there's a key piece in communication and moving into a place of emotional maturity is recognizing I'm responsible for my behavior. I'm responsible for my emotion. You can't make me feel a certain way, so I'm not going to say you statements. I'm going to say, I feel a certain way when you do this. This is how I feel. So you're taking responsibility for your feeling.
That's right.
But you're also communicating to them and their behavior that you're struggling with something on the inside when they behave a certain way.
Yes. So talking about listening, being an active listener, just in response to the statement I just made about my assertive communication was what I needed about finances. And as an active listener, you would say, if I understand what you said, so you're clarifying, you're saying, here's what I think I heard you say.
Got it.
You would feel more respected and appreciated if we talk over financial decisions before we commit to spending for things not in our budget. Did I hear you correctly?
Okay.
So what do you think about that?
Well, I mean, you're clarifying and communicating. To me, that's clarity.
Yep. And I think this goes back to filters and things like that, because you might hear someone with your ears, but you don't hear what they actually meant. And that's why this is so important, because sometimes we've communicated around things, and let's just say maybe I've said, this is what I think I hear you saying. And you're like, no, that's really not what I meant. And so you don't get mad. You either recognize that maybe you didn't communicate clearly, or I'm just not understanding. And so that just means we have to go at this again to try to communicate it another way. And it can get frustrating, but if we really love the way Jesus did, we will work through this until we get to the heart of what's trying to be communicated. And that is the point of this, is that if you want your marriage and relationship to be better, you have to put in the work to communicate through these things. And, it's harder up front, a lot like parenting. You do a lot of the discipline up front and parenting up front. So things are easier later. In the marriage, you got to do a lot of the work in the beginning so that things are better as time goes on.
Absolutely.
So the person asked, basically, how do I navigate whatever he's going through internally? So the way I understand this question, if I understand whoever sent this question is, my spouse, because they said he, is going through something internally, and I'm assuming that they probably are not communicating that. Maybe there's some evidence on the outside. How do you think that it would be helpful for a spouse to respond to that?
Again, this depends upon where that man is in his maturity and in his process. Because again, you cannot make people express how they feel. Men really struggle with that. But again, I would ask some good questions. So, can you share with me a little more about how you're feeling, and create an environment of honor, respect, love, and the best that you can, and safety where that can be shared, and just ask them to share. But again, pray, ask good questions. Don't force if they are like, no, I don't want to talk about that. But I would also encourage them, after I've done all of that, I would probably encourage them, if you don't feel like, and this is hard, if you don't feel like you can talk to me, will you talk to someone else? Will you talk to a respected, another brother, a counselor, someone, a therapist, someone? Will you talk to someone about how you feel. I just want you to be able to talk about that, particularly if you know that there's something clammed up inside that is keeping a man from really functioning in who he is. And we men really tend to be stuffers and bottle stuff in, but there's nothing more free as a man to be able to know how you feel and communicate it, and to not be led by our emotions. That's not what we're talking about. As a matter of fact, I think communicating around them and communicating them keeps them from controlling us and keeps us from being like a ticking time bomb or that pressure cooker that eventually blows because we haven't communicated what's going on internally.
I think there's been times that I've seen in you, I can tell you're wrestling with something, and I've asked you, I feel like maybe you're wrestling with something right now. Is it anything you want to talk about? And a lot of times you'll say, yeah, it's this or that. But there's times where you've said, I am, but I don't really know what it is.
Yeah.
And I think it's okay.
Yes.
We need to know it's okay if you, as a man, if you don't have the answer for what it is you're struggling with, maybe you just feel angst and bothered. Sometimes that's just what happens. It's the reality of what happens. We get moody or we get a certain way. But for me and for you, I think just being able to say, I am, you're right, but I don't really know what it is.
Yeah. Sometimes it's a clearer thoughts or stuff we're thinking about or circumstances that are leading to this struggle emotionally. But there are times where I'm just like, I have no idea. And those are challenging because you're like, you feel a certain sort of way. I'm like anxious, I'm amped, I'm a little bit maybe angry, or sometimes I'm like, I really don't know I can describe how I feel, but I am, as they say these days, I'm a little bit up in my feelings, and just not really sure what's going on emotionally, but my desire is to communicate that. And that's super helpful.
And we won't spend a lot of time on this question because I think we've kind of covered it in what we just talked about, but how to be more sensitive to her emotions and control my anger, I think is really the same thing as what we just talked about.
Right.
Even if your spouse is feeling emotional, the response is still the same. Asking good questions with a sensitive heart toward just genuinely wanting to know what is going on with them, and not pressing them to give answers is really the way to go about that.
Yeah. And there is, in generalities, I mean, though there are things about you that are more direct in your communication, and because of your work in corporate with a lot of men, you've learned to bullet point and be short in phrases. And there's a lot of things you've learned to adjust, but there is differences in men and women. There's been some, I can't remember who it was, that even wrote some stuff on men are like buffaloes and women are like butterflies. And the way that you communicate, you have to hit a buffalo over the head with a 4x4. And if you do that with a woman, she'll be like a butterfly and you'll kill it. So there is some things about being sensitive and understanding in general how you communicate. With you, I can typically communicate a little more direct, but still things have to be done with sensitivity. And if you have two radically different temperaments and you have a man and a woman, you have to take all of those things into consideration, because in generalities, there are some differences and in our temperament, our behavior, but also in our sexual, in our sexes.
Mm-hmm. So one more question, and then I want to talk about the last thing about what we tended to fight about when we first got married, because that's going to lead into what our next session is going to be about. But one person asked about, basically they're saying that they tell each other everything, but what's the, where is it appropriate to be completely honest with your spouse, and maybe where you shouldn't be?
Yeah, I think this is a crazy question, because I've seen...
Crazy good?
Yeah, it really is. And it's also, people say, well, I tell my wife everything. Well, I think there does need to be absolutely authenticity, accountability, vulnerability in our relationship. But I'm not so sure you should be telling each other everything. I don't want to know everything from your past. Mm-hmm. And I don't think you want to know everything from my past as far as, our sexual relationships before we came to Christ. I don't want to know all the details of that. Mm-hmm. And I've had couples that I coached before talk about inappropriate things about other people around them. Like, who would you want to enter into a relationship with around the church?
Yeah.
I mean, things
if
like
I
that. I'm like,
died or
whoa. I'm like, bro, that is foolish and stupidity. And I've trained men in our time of confession and accountability to confess their temptation, because if you can start addressing your temptation in your mind, thoughts, past encounters, some girl at the gym, if you will automatically start confessing that, it will nip it in the bud. And I'm not so sure that's the best thing to be doing with your wife.
I'd rather not know.
And I think if you'll do that with men, that's great. But I'm not so sure that's a good thing to be confessing to your wife. And what it does is, if you confess your temptation, it's almost like you're bringing your temptation into the light. You should always bring your sin into the light. But this deals with stuff before there is sin. So this is a really good way to basically live in accountability, vulnerability, and purity. But I'm not so sure I would be doing that.
Yeah, the only other thing I can think of that we don't communicate with each other is things that are shared in our accountability groups.
That too.
That, you know, people tell me, and I'm in one of my accountability groups, I don't tell Guy what the women say, and he doesn't tell me what the guys say, because that's just not honoring their confession. Yeah. And so, but outside of those things, we pretty much tell each other everything. Yeah. But as far as those types of things that could cause the enemy to get a foothold, where my mind could go crazy thinking about things he might have been tempted about, and he's just confessed it and moved on, and now I've made a big deal of it because in my mind it's grown to be something bigger than it ever was. That's just not necessary. Yep. It just makes it harder. So the last thing that I want to talk about is the fact that we fought about sex a lot. So if our kids are listening, you can turn it off now because you won't want to hear this. But
basically, Mom was always trying to pursue me for some love.
No, babe, that's not what it was. We fought a lot about sex in our early days of marriage. Probably really not just our early days, probably the first 10 years of our marriage. For sure. A lot in the beginning, less as time went on, but there would be seasons of fighting about it. Initially, a lot of it, and we're going to talk at length about this in our next episode, but a lot of it was around my past, things that just I brought into the relationship. And so I just want to preface by saying that is a struggle that is very familiar to us, and that we are going to be talking about in our next episode about emotional connection and intimacy. And we're looking forward to having that conversation. Not an easy one, because it's very vulnerable and nobody likes to talk about their sex life with other people, and certainly not in detail, but just things that we struggle with. And so we're looking forward to that session. So thanks for joining us
It's called the Mud and Rib Podcast.
Mud and Rib Podcast. Where are we? Who am I?
Yes.
All this talk about marriage has got me confused. So next time it's going to be about emotional intimacy and connection. And we are looking forward to that conversation. If you would like, subscribe, share our podcast with other people, we would so appreciate it, because we want more and more people to be able to listen and hopefully find help around love, life, and leadership. And we appreciate you being with us.
Blessings to you.